Hey guys, my name is J.R. Young. I'm going to be talking to you about my final presentation product, and I feel like mine's rather easy. I'm doing the music and education, so my major right now is secondary education for history, and I feel like I kind of lucked out because it's rather an easy topic to talk about is how music would relate to my area of study. Even in our music class, we progress throughout the semester talking about music over time and through history, so it's rather the same thing. In my Western Civilization class that I have now this semester, that just came to an end, several times, we would talk about different artists and stuff of that era across Europe. So it's rather easy to talk about. Secondary education in general is high school level of education, and this covers obviously all your core classes and whatever electives it is you take, and even sports. The reason I mention that is because you even have high school bands and everything that do music as well. So you get to learn about music in that aspect, even if it's not necessarily a learning class. Um, Music underlies every aspect of post-secondary schooling in some way or another. Students obviously listening to music. I know probably everybody listens to music more than likely, especially teenagers in high school. So, and it also covers across every subject: history, literature, special education, and even sciences when you're talking about the anatomy of a lot of instruments. Um, One thing I wanted to touch on before I jump into more of my area is, and that's history, is the um, special needs area of music and kind of what it does. Um, they people with special needs, they don't really think the same way we do, and they learn a lot differently. And music can really help them understand things more. It kind of um, simplifies it for them, and it just gives it an easier way to learn. Even us, we sit there and think, why can we study for a test for hours and not remember anything, but listen to a song twice and know every word. Just with the beat of the song and the rhythm and the tempo of it, it just kind of um, a lot easier for us to remember. And so, kids with special needs, they use music in all kind of ways to teach them whatever it is they're trying to help them learn, and it really does help um, students with special needs and even people like us. So I'm going to, in particular, talk about pop music throughout the last, I think I got it for 5 decades here since the 50s. I was going to do even further back, but I feel like this was maybe a little more interesting as we've already spoke. We've went back several hundred years in our music class, so I figured this is something a little different. This PowerPoint that I'm reading off of, I'm also going to share for you to follow along. It's not completely detailed; it's more of an outline. But you can be looking at that while I speak. It'll be shared with you guys. So when we talk about the 50s, this was more of the age of rock and roll. Rock was more or less being replaced, or not necessarily replaced, it was being transformed into pop music because, as you'll see, which we've also talked about towards the end of our semester, was how different genres of music kind of were combining and intertwining with each other to make a new sound. So in the 50s, you had people combining country and blues and folk music to the mainstream rock sounds, and it resulted in something new, and it was very large, and of course everybody wants to listen to it, and it was evident in people such as Johnny Ray, Frankie Lane, and Guy Mitchell, all who worked for a guy named Mitch Miller, and Mitch Miller was a leading producer at a place called Columbia Records, which is still around today. So that's a pretty big deal. And during this time, we also had Elvis Presley, which we all know who Elvis Presley is, which he come around in the early 50s, and we all know his songs Hound Dog and everything. And I think that was probably the most popular song of that time. So it was that type of music that was really getting people's interest and started evolving to the pop sound we have today. Then you jump into the 60s. was pop sounds more of a teen fan base, and in the '60s we were introduced to a portable radio, so that just allowed people to travel and listen to music everywhere. Now this is really important because with this music changing, it's allowing it to be heard more every day by different people, allowing people to be like, hey, listen to this, so you're getting so many more eyes and ears on the new type of music that's being created. During this time in the '60s, we had the Beach Boys, which I actually listened to. They were taking harmonies from traditional songs and layering them with, I guess, what you would call surf rock. And it was just kind of a driving force for the pop music in the '60s, so it's kind of started there. And you also had the British Invasion, which is a bunch of British people actually, that are over here making music, and in particular the Beatles, which we also just talked about here at the end of the semester. They were the most popular at this time, and they kind of shaped the way. They were new music, new recording opportunities. You had a lot more high-end technology in the recording studios to record the sounds of people like the Beatles. So that helped really boost it just in 10 years. You're talking about going from the '50s to the '60s, you got the radio and new technology to be able to record. Jumping into the '70s, you start seeing a lot more subgenres. Like I said, there's so many different types of music being mixed together to form one thing. You kind of had more of a punk rock type thing in the '70s, which it kind of died out. And you also seen some country pop emerging in the '70s, which was also died out because when I say these next few people's names, you'll know why. And we know how popular they are with us growing up 30-something years later. People like the Jackson 5 and Elton John and Queen. So when you have people like that doing their pop music and their pop rock sound, it's hard to steer away from that. You had the biggest songs like Benny and the Jets and Don't Go Breaking My Heart. We hear those today. We can't turn the radio on without hearing that. Jumping into the '80s, digital recording was huge. Possibilities allowed music to grow even more. Synthesizers and electronic sounds were being heard a lot more in the pop music, and it also kind of started the genre of techno and allowed people to maybe want to move more and dance more. You also had Michael Jackson, which part of the Jackson 5 in the '80s when he singled out, and you had his song like Thriller, and you also had people like Prince who were following him up in stardom, and they pulled music that was pop, it was rock, funk, it was all the kind of things in one. And you also started seeing a lot more female powerhouses that you hadn't seen in the prior 20 or 30 years with Whitney Houston and Madonna. And the '80s was just, in general, was creating a pop music culture unlike the previous decades that would again just keep helping advance it farther and farther. So back into the '90s, you saw pop obviously continuing to grow, and then you had a bunch of girl groups. We saw a British group called the Spice Girls, and they're the most, in the '90s, they're going to be the largest British group since the Beatles, and there were also very successful pop groups along with them, such as the Backstreet Boys. We've all heard of them. We've also heard of Britney Spears. That's when she actually was very popular. I remember hearing her music when I was a lot younger, and figured she was more relevant in the 2000s, but she kind of came more at the end of the '90s. That was really when she started picking up. And in the 2000s, where we're at now, we get to hear everything that's just kind of evolved. People like Lady Gaga, for example, she's probably a big example, just like Savannah had talked about in class. We've never heard anything like her, seen anything like her. So many electronic sounds. You have somebody like Rihanna, who's a female R&B singer with a lot of influence of hip hop in her songs. Blink-182 was very popular at the start of the 2000s, which is a little bit more rock rock inspired. And teen pop, obviously with Britney Spears, like I mentioned, as she continued throughout the 2000s. Um, it just kind of became much more than a catchy melody and repeated verses. Um, it's a representation of the way music just evolved throughout the years, and it gathered up so many sounds that people thought wouldn't have worked together. As we've seen the coming up of country pop, like I said, in the 70s, that died away very quickly with the powerhouses of that time. Even today, take somebody like Sam Hunt. I mean, he's a country singer, but you listen to it and you can definitely hear the pop influence in that. So it just really allowed music to change, all the advancements in time, the recording, different sounds, just different people just trying new things. They didn't really stick to one idea in music. Nothing ever really does. So as time progresses, it's always going to change. And here in another 50 years, if somebody's doing a project like this, I'm sure they'll get to talk about how it's changed in our lives. So yeah, take a look at that. Read along with the PowerPoint that I share with you guys. And yeah, y'all have a great summer.